Hi.
Jana.
Hi. I noticed that you're online already.
Sorry if I'm starting a bit early. No, I
Good.
just wanted to yeah, I just wanted to make sure everything was working right.
Well prepared.
Nice.
um, so you're okay with COVID?
Yeah, I've been I got it probably about when was it confirmed? Like last Wednesday. I feel a bit better today, but yeah, it's just been last couple of days have just been awful. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, there's no energy whatsoever.
Oh, yeah, it's really tough. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, have you had COVID before or?
No, I didn't. But my family, the rest of my family had. So
Oh no,
I,
okay.
yeah, I'm vaccinated. So fine.
Okay, sure.
But I mean, the rest, or my husband was too. So it didn't, yeah. Oh gosh, it's really scary that it is now younger and younger people, and
Yeah,
you
I
can
know.
really feel something. I have a student at the moment who got it from her partner, but she says she has nothing. She only because she had to take tests, then she noticed that she was positive, but yeah, hadn't really.
It's really odd. Yeah, I mean, I've had both of my vaccines and I still got it. I just,
Oh, right. Yeah.
yeah, it's just I don't get it. Yeah.
The only hope is that because of vaccines, then you hope that you'll probably get a milder form.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm really fortunate that I was able to get vaccines anyway because I know a lot of people my age haven't. So, yeah,
That's true.
no,
It's true. So you are in your third year, or?
yes, I'm in my third year, so I deferred for a year and I've come back and I'm doing illustration animation. But thank you so much for
No,
emailing me back and stuff. It's yeah,
no, it
that was great.
doesn't always happen, I have to say.
Yeah,
This
no.
turned so mad. I mean, yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just for my dissertation, what I've been doing. It's just, I mean, I was listening to a podcast, and then when they said your last name, I was like, I feel like I recognized the last name. And then when I looked on the description, and then it said obviously Kingston University as well, I was just like, oh, no way, no way. Yeah.
So you're writing it with Maggie. Is this right?
Yes, yes,
Yep.
Maggie Gray. Yeah, no, I'm very, very fortunate as well to have her be my personal tutor as well. She's great. Yeah,
She's fantastic. Yeah. Yep.
yeah.
Great. So what do you want to know?
I've got a couple of questions, I suppose. Just, uh, yeah. Basically, my first one. I mean, my first couple are just asking kind of you about you being a curator and what that entails, and then kind of my a few questions that I've got nearer the end go into kind of more just kind of the impact of COVID, I suppose. I mean, my first question, to be honest, is just what do you feel is the fundamental role of a curator?
Oh, good. Um, okay, I'm coming to this. Can I start with a question?
Of course.
Because I wanted to ask you this before. Why are you interested in curating?
I suppose it's had a big deal with actually COVID. I mean, I've because of being in Kingston, I've been fortunate to in my first, second, and third year go back and forth into London and really utilize the museums there.
Okay.
And I've just been the more and more I've gone, I've just been more and more interested into how it how they showcase these works. Why do they showcase works in a certain way? Why also as well, and I'll get into my question a bit later, but just like I've been feeling that maybe it's just because of the exhibitions I've been going to, but the more and more exhibitions I go to, there's more use of interactive and immersive technologies, and that's sort of, and it's made me reevaluate and the way I approach my work and how I
Mhm.
want people to how I want whether I want people to interact with my own work or not. Because from what I'm studying, illustration animation, it's quite a broad practice, I suppose. So yeah, if that answers your question.
Yeah. No, because yeah, I mean, the interesting bit is probably in this respect, and why I'm asking, we have quite a number of illustration animation students who then continue on the MA. And
Yeah.
it seems a good combination because you have skills that you can really utilize
Yeah.
for exhibitions, for not only exhibitions, for curating, I would say. And that brings me, of course, to my definition of curating,
Yeah.
which I would probably want to specify in saying I'm talking about curating contemporary design most of the time, because this is the area that I'm most familiar with. However, it overlaps a lot with curating art, of course. And what I feel what we do as curators is to translate probably and communicate works that we, with the help of works of design and art, conditions and situations that our world is in.
Okay.
So what I mean with this is really that on the one side, I mean that curating for me is really, really focused on the contents and works with the contents. And we are in between a lot of people, so quite, and not necessarily, as you rightly observed, we are not any more necessarily in between, but traditionally, it would be that the curator would kind of build a collection or select objects that he or she found valuable to kind of bring to a larger audience to communicate sometimes the skills, sometimes the kind of state of development of technology or whatever it is. Sometimes kind of the way the projections into the future. And so what has changed in recent years? So that can happen. That is where museums come in. So how the V&A has started was with as a kind of on the aftermath, so to say, of the World's Fair in 1952 in Hyde Park, where then what the World's Fair showed to Britain, and especially the organizers, Henry Cole, who became then that I. Oh, let me quickly get my door.
No,
I'm
it's all good. It's all good.
okay.
It's
Sorry.
good. It's all good. No, don't be sorry at all.
So, what Henry Cole and Prince Albert realized was that actually what they thought will be the celebration of British industry and design and craft at this point was actually a disappointment, because they realized that so many other countries had much better things to offer. So they realized that they need to kind of educate and train people, and what better than using example objects to kind of show these, to show kind of industry and craftspeople that they could come to the museum and see them and learn from them. So with this in mind, the curating bit had already this kind of educational part in it. And I feel, I mean, I probably feel as curators, we should have a very open and wide educational concept. So not one that I'm your teacher and I'm teaching you what is right or wrong, but more in kind of in this translator role, so that there is something that a specialist field, in this, in our case, design, is doing and practicing, not necessarily always with an audience in mind. So, and as for instance, industry, probably they have in mind that they want to sell the objects, but how they do it, how they negotiate, why they have made certain decisions, that is our task. So that is why we are in between. And quite often, what I feel is the exciting part probably nowadays is we have realized in the last decades how complex the world is with globalization, with digital, etc. And so there are a lot of things where, for instance, we notice that, which we have to explain. So exhibitions are a good way, like now in the Design Museum, there is a Waystage exhibition. So it's a good way of addressing certain critical issues. However, so now we come to the point of formats. Exhibitions have been, and kind of coming from the collections and to make these collections public, of course, the best way was always to put them in displays and allow people to come in. So that is how museums have been built. And exhibitions are then a form of looking or presenting again and again in a new way the collection. So it's not always kind of parts of the collection, and that is the interesting bit. In collecting objects, that we always realize they have so many layers. So and the layers are always connected to different narratives. So that is why you can show the glass as glass. I can show it as industrial design. I can show it as a container for water. I can, and so many things. I can show it as mass production, whatever. So that is the interesting bit at a collection, that we constantly read and reread this collection in an attempt, of course, to write history, but also in an attempt to understand contemporary and potentially the future better. So to get an idea of where are we now? Why are we here? Why did this happen? But why are we in a climate crisis? Whatever, So that is where, academics or scientists, they kind of write then books or scientific texts. And we are somehow in between. So we also write, but most of the time we feel we have this duty of translating it for people who have nothing to do with this. So
right.
But however, it doesn't always have to, curating is not only there for everyone. Or what I want to say, that always, whatever we do with exhibitions, they always have to be for everyone.
Right.
There are also exhibitions, as you know, they are for very specific groups. For instance, commercial galleries, they have commercial exhibitions because they want to sell things. So they have this aspect foregrounded. So what happened in recent decades, more and more, was something that we realized, for instance, if you talk about waste, or for instance, 5 years ago, I did a project with my students where we looked into water as a challenge to understand, how do we deal with immaterial objects? So how do we can't show water, what do we show then? And so that was a way of speaking about the whole digital world. However, water was interesting, and the final brief was to kind of do something to change the situation at KSA in terms of single-use plastic bottles.
Right.
And what was interesting is that after, the students went around, asked other students about this, and everyone was aware of the situation, that it's bad, etc., but couldn't do anything because there was just, at this time, for instance, the students did an analysis and they found out that most of the water dispensers, they were either hidden or not existent or in really disgusting places, where you really wouldn't want to kind of refill your water bottle. So that has changed, but it was really interesting, to kind of find out. And then the students said, so we don't need to make people aware of that it's bad or what they have to do. They all say what we need is, probably the cafe should stop selling it. We realize we can't change that. But if we, for instance, what I think then happened, If we give every new student a water bottle, a refillable water bottle, that might help. If we have water stations everywhere in the university, of course, every student would refill their bottles and drink this water. So there was this realization that they said, actually, an exhibition will not help. So long story. What I'm coming to is that exhibitions make aware or can speculate on something, but sometimes they are not the right forum because you are always sharing with a lot of people. So in this instance, the students realized the people we have to speak to is senior management, because they are everywhere we speak to. We are hitting a ceiling because people are not empowered to make these decisions.
Right.
So what they then did in this case, very specific case, is they invented, or and that is why I was then looking into curated dinners, was that they created a lunch. I had kind of introduced them to this project, but I had to this point also never done one. And so the students thought, okay, if we do a lunch and we invite them, so on the one side, we can curate this lunch that they are really feeling they are getting the input and getting probably more than what they would, in a brief, in a letter or so get. And we create a tension and an urgency in this dinner that in the end, we can ask this very concrete question, what are you doing? And so that's, I have been interested to this point into various formats. For instance, public programming has become more and more part of curatorial work, which was before very often it was just a project, but it was a project manager who managed, we invited someone or she, and then they would run an event like a podiums discussion or something. And that was in addition to the exhibition. What happens now, quite in the few instances, for instance, in my view, the Design Museum was one of the first institutions who, with Sumitra Upham, unfortunately she left now, made this conscious decision to kind of appoint a curator into this role. That meant that they are, as an institution, they are involved in creating this content. So for instance, if Sumitra invited me to kind of run, for instance, with this water project, she said, oh, that would be really great. We should kind of run a project about this. Then we were thinking about, so is a podiums discussion best, or should it just be an interview with one person? Should this be a lecture? Should this be something else? So, and then she did research and I did research, and then we came together and we curated this together. So that is something where I see a shift in not what happens also in museums, that not necessarily the curator is just doing exhibitions and then we have an educational department. That's why I meant at the beginning, I would really like to have a broad definition of education, because for me, this is not something education department necessarily does, but which is part of curating. Of course, there are certain things, for instance, quite often you have in the education department people who are really, really clued up with regard to curriculums and, and school children or certain age groups, and can create programs for them. So that is something where I feel, we are always really working closely together, but in recent years, the curatorial formats, they have really exploded. So there is nothing, I would say, there is nothing that couldn't become a curated format. So, so for instance, 2 years ago, I looked with my students into the relationship between design and film, because that was something when I was in the V&A and collected objects for their collection. I realized, a few years back, or a decade back, probably now, that most designers, young designers, they would give me the object, they would tell me, probably we would collect some drawings with it or whatever, and models or prototypes, whatever they have. And then they would also say, and I also have a film. Do you want the film as well? And I was like, so what is this film? Is this a documentation? Is this a process film? And of course, it was something in between. It was a little bit of documentation. Very often it was an art film. It was definitely promotion of this project. However, what I also noticed is that, of course, because then distribution is much easier, that with a lot of projects, the films that not even, I mean, that were done by a filmmaker, not the designers, they became far more famous than the objects in some cases, you know, because they could very easily distributed. So you could see it, people could refer back to the project, had never seen the object, you know. And what I realized there was that I did ask many designers, you know, what do you think? And quite often I got the same answer, that they would say, but, you know, for us, this is great. So I'm doing a film. I've never done films before, but increasingly it seems like everyone is doing films, and it's easy to kind of then distribute. So this is great. And I was like, but what is the relationship to the object that you're creating as well? And they were like, this is your question, not mine. You know, so that was really interesting to see that actually, yes, of course, you know, whether I'm doing one drawing or 15 drawings, or whether I do a model or a prototype or not a prototype, or how I work, you know, that is, I will not define this, you know, I take whatever comes. And they were like, if there are films, you know, we have to kind of talk about this. So that's why we looked into this relationship. And in the end, we did a film festival, which was, again, a very conventional format for films. But then we thought of and tested how much will a film festival change if we curate this, if we really think about how can we, these elements of our research that we don't necessarily just want to kind of present in an academic paper, you know, how can we kind of show them to the public to also make them understood that there is something going on here. So my students, I mean, it was online because of COVID, but it was great, I have to say, online, because far more people could kind of access it. And we could kind of quietly, I mean, otherwise we would have had 3 days of a festival. And so now we had more than 2 months. And so we released a film every other day. We had online studio visits where the designers kind of took us through their studio and explained how they work. We had a pub quiz. We had kind of people, not just curators, but also different types of people who wrote about elements, objects in films. So in famous films like carpets or chairs or windows or cars or whatever, as design objects, to also kind of say, you know, that certain, sometimes stereotypes, but sometimes also ideas about, you know, that we become familiar with certain objects that have been too radical for years and decades, you know, and all of a sudden through films, we sometimes are brought into these environments where you think like, actually, I mean, if I'm brave enough, I might buy this chair or this table, you know, and all of a sudden now we see modernist furniture everywhere, you know, but where you think like, wow, 100 years later, we are still thinking that we are so radical, you know, with something that has been designed such a long time ago. So what I want to say is that what I feel is the most interesting part in curatorial practice at this moment is that that you have to be very critical about what is the format that you choose. And of course, this has to do on the one side with the content, you know, with the things that you want to communicate, and on the other side with your audience. And that again is something that we see where very often people ask, I mean, in our case, most of the time designers, but also, for instance, scientists ask us to become part of a project because they say, you know, I can produce numbers, for instance, about climate change, you know, that are becoming more and more dramatic, but they will be presented in the newspaper and no one blinks an eye.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how can I communicate this in a way, for instance, through a narrative, through fiction, through objects that we do together with designers, you know, where all of a sudden people get involved in a story, or you can speculate together about the effect this will have, you know, and then this becomes different. If you start talking about, you know, how about when you are in 10 years' time? You know, shall we just kind of think about where do you want to be then? You know, and then you start telling a story. If you don't change anything, this is where the world will be. You know, that and these kind of, or for instance, at the moment, my students, or one group of my students, this year we are looking into the relationship between design and democracy. So not an easy one. Um, and so one group of my students, they want to kind of develop games where teenagers can develop games about democracy as a way of world building, so that they can, through these games, can test worlds that they imagine or that they don't imagine, you know, but where they, for instance, say, oh, these are my values and I'm taking them, and then I'm playing the game, and we'll see what happens then. You know, and then a little bit like, you know, could also be online, you know, like Minecraft. If you then would see how your foundation is not strong enough, and that, you know, water levels will rise and you're just swamped away, or you can only end up in dictatorship with these values, you know, that would be interesting to do. So in this respect, that is what I mean with, there are no formats that are not necessarily impossible. It just needs to kind of fit to content and audience.
Got you. I mean, it's really interesting when you're saying that, because I mean, so do you feel that as a curator, your job is kind of two things? So like, one is to translate the message of an artist or somebody who's, you know, who's employed you or requested you to do this, to translate their work, and then the second is to create engagement. Then is that?
Yeah, yes and no. I have to say, what happens very rarely is that an artist comes to you. So in most cases, for instance, at the moment I'm co-curating an exhibition for the next Saint-Étienne Design Biennial. And so, of course, we have been asked or commissioned to do an exhibition about domesticity, which, of course, that was before lockdown. And then lockdown has kind of made this quite a very topical topic.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
And so then, because the three curators that we have been kind of discussing and researching into this topic for a while, and then we would think about, you know, you develop a concept, and then you think about what are the design projects that you know that fit to this concept, and then you would start discussing it. Very often, I have to say, in my view, that was really a challenge during COVID, that you couldn't go and do studio visits. So the limitation is then, you know, that you choose something that you either know or where which you read about or heard somewhere, you know, but very often then the communication is just, is this work available? And so the designer would say yes or no, and that's it. So quite often you have to, I mean, in the cases when I know the designers, then it's easier because you can say, hey, and what are you doing now? You know, whatever. So there is a relationship always there. And the closer the relationship is, or the more you know from each other, you know, the better you can develop something for this exhibition. Not necessarily that designers are always doing something new, but very often I have to say, they are in the process, or there is work that they have done so long ago that I wouldn't know about this, or it was work that was never published or something like this,
Right.
where they then say, actually, this works much better, or sometimes, is there any money, that we can develop this project further in the context of this exhibition? So in this respect, I have to say, and that has also changed in recent years, not because of COVID, but in recent years, that it's not necessarily a passive, I'm the curator, I'm making an object list, and then hopefully 80% will happen, but more that you develop relationships with designers. Very often they would also talk about, other designers that they know or that have done work, and so that is how you develop slowly kind of a concept where where projects can be presented in an exhibition. And then, of course, nowadays you also think about, certain objects, for instance, what happens very easily now because of the content of film, that you end up, for instance, our first object list, I think we had 3.5 hours of film in the exhibition. So that no one will watch that.
Yeah.
So, then you think about, certain films are much, much better to watch as part of a film program. So you might curate a film program at the side. And then there are probably some films that are more these kind of what I called promotional films beforehand, these short clips that you can show on the website, because that is the material that you don't necessarily need to have in the exhibition to communicate the project. So that is something where I feel more and more, and I think you alluded to it at the beginning, it becomes participatory work that also very often, I have developed projects with designers because of the work that I was doing or the exhibition I was doing. They got stimulated, I would give them readings, or I would, and we would then develop this project together. It's still their project, but sometimes you get involved, but that can easily happen. And that, I feel, is for both sides most of the time really kind of beneficial.
100%. Yeah.
And then there is one last probably change that has happened in recent years, and that is the audience. So that with participatory practices, what can also happen is that you invite the audience in this process of creation. And especially when you speak about contemporary issues, very often to really understand a certain condition or situation, and if it's somehow local, then you would work with a certain community. So that is then where quite often the initiation or the curator has been initiating these projects, but it can also be the designer, but then to kind of negotiate with the audience or finding a community and then working with this. And then it can be something that happens just for the community, and has nothing necessarily, has no exhibition attached or any, because that is not the meaningful thing.
Right.
And then I find also really interesting that this has changed in recent years, that it is not for many also design projects, the designers are not necessarily super interested anymore in, I have to formulate this carefully, because anyways, designers would say, what? I mean, we're always interested in kind of displaying our work, of course, but there are areas, where designers also say, I have shown these projects everywhere, but in the end, there was no feedback to me. It didn't really change anything. It was celebrated. Yes, fine. But if I'm doing a critical work where I say, something needs to happen, resources are declining, for instance, and then everyone is just saying, yeah, really terrible.
That's not what you want, right? No, yeah.
And so there I see that, also designers say, no, then I'm going there and I'm changing the situation. So what can we do? Can we speak to, or can we change quite often structures or industry or politics even? But that is where, again, the dinner format comes into play. Not necessarily the dinner, but where I think, in my view, curating, needs to have this opportunity that you can also choose your audience. And sometimes it's as little as 10 people. So that is what I did with these curated dinners that I choose as a research project, but mainly to really understand, in a world where action is needed, where it's not enough to kind of make people aware, because everyone is aware. We are talking about most of the issues all the time, and you open the newspaper and it's full, and you listen to the news and your social media is full. But the problem is, so how can we activate the right people that they make decisions? And that is sometimes where I feel we have an opportunity, but sometimes these need to happen behind closed doors. So it cannot always be the public forum. You will, with certain people, with senior management, you can't just stand in front of the university and protest and say, please, can you could do that, and probably some would listen, but if you go there and present, you are refurbishing the university. That was when we did the water project. That was before that. In the drawings that you have kind of publicly shown in the model, you haven't considered water dispensers. So where are they? And they should just be built in, etc., etc. This is a kind of easy thing to do, but it comes from curatorial research. Then it is connected to, of course, that we knew that we spoke to designers, what is the best form to do that, and they all said, for instance, one brief of one group of my students was like, oh, can you design a new water bottle? And they were like, why would we do that? There are so many water bottles in the world. They are good. So just pick and choose, buy. That's it. You don't need us. What you might need us with, but not really product designers, but you might need a better campaign. So go to illustrators, animators, or go to film students, make a film about it, and that is where it becomes an interesting how you collaborate to do something that is not in any conventional way curatorial. It's not institutional. It has nothing to do with museums, galleries. It is a form of practice that can communicate things in a different way than necessarily any discipline, because it is, in my view, also intrinsically interdisciplinary.
Got you. Yeah, because I was really from the podcast where you were discussing about why you did the dinners, the tables, a school of expanded formats. I was really interested from one of the bits particularly stood out to me when you were saying about I think there is a huge need to bring curating into spaces that are not necessarily museums and galleries. Yeah. And then you were saying because despite what museums and galleries have done over the last 10, 20 years, 30 years in providing more access, making it more easier for people to come and widening their program tremendously and using different formats and speaking to people, there is still a huge a huge public that feels like museums are not the places where they would want to go. Like it's funny because from being so close to London but still being away from it, I felt like in my year I'd be like one of the only people who'd actually go weekly to different museums and events and stuff like that. But then my rest of my classmates wouldn't be going, and they'd be and they would be asking me like why. I felt like there was a disconnect there between them going, as if like they would only go if they were required to from the university requesting them to go. And it kind of draws me to a point where like for instance a couple of months ago I was fortunate to go to the Van Gogh Alive experience at Kensington Gardens. I don't know if you saw that. The Van Gogh experience. It's where they, where they got his work, where they did his work and they reworked it through like projection mapping and video mapping. I went with it with my dad, who doesn't come from an art background. However, I enjoyed it a lot, but he really enjoyed it because he liked how he liked the whole idea of being immersed, and there was a part of the exhibition where you basically walked into a room where there was plastic sunflowers. So as if you felt like you were in one of his pieces, one of his works. And when I asked him about it, why he was kind of so receptive to it in comparison to other, I've been to a few museums and stuff with him, quite big establishments as well. And he just felt that it didn't have that, he felt like he was invited because of the interactive technologies that they were using. He was it was more of an inviting experience. So I was wondering, like, because we also went as well to the Imperial War Museum, their new Second World War collection, which utilizes kind of the same sort of technologies, but to educate you on, historical events as opposed to an artist's work. I was wondering, just from the research that I've done, obviously that was growing, but do you feel like it's kind of accelerated because of COVID, because of that whole idea of engaging? Because, for instance, like, you're not able to go to these museums, so there was more kind of online platforms, and then when you came back to these museums, you had to socially distance. So yeah, sorry, that's quite a big question, but that's something I was interested in your opinion.
No, it's interesting. I probably see this as this is something that happened over the last couple of years, which not necessarily is kind of an effect of COVID and immersive. I mean, this immersive exhibitions in particular, I would probably kind of say this has been possible mainly because the technology has become affordable. That probably 20 years ago we could have probably done something like this, but it would have been so expensive, that you couldn't necessarily do that. And nowadays, I mean, like the Van Gogh exhibition, these are huge commercial things most of the time, which I'm pretty sure most curators are a little bit careful about, However, there is an important point that you made, and that is access and invitation. So I feel, I mean, in recent years with accessibility, there is a lot of not always successful, I have to say, but a lot of discussions around how can museums become not only more accessible, but also more inviting, so that you feel like you are a host as a curator and you invite people in, so that really they lose this elitist.
After your fucking phone, you don't come. Sorry, it's my flatmate. Jesus.
That's all right.
Jesus. Sorry, carry on.
So they lose this elitist attitude, very often not even kind of noticing, the way they write, the way they talk about things. And of course, there is a part where you think like, I mean, at least you need some sort of degree to go to a museum and understand their text. And I feel that is something that I would critique in fine art museums more than design museums, because I mean, they have in recent years really done the opposite, and the texts have become more and more like philosophical texts where you think like, who are you serving? I mean, and I feel there is also something, where in my experience, I have gone through so many art museums with people who are not necessarily on their own, wouldn't go there, and what I find really, really sad is that museums are so intimidating that people say, I wouldn't understand anything, so I will not go. And you feel like, you know what? I mean, art is there for anyone. There is nothing to understand. Sometimes, of course, it is helpful if you know backgrounds, or you can tell a story, or you know what has happened. But in general, the work is doing the work. So
Yeah.
you can go there and say, I don't have anything to do with these works, and that is fine. And if you're then standing in front of a Van Gogh and you say, wow, this is exactly what I need at this point, perfect. And so that, I feel, is something, if they are just dealing on this kind of academic discourse level, that is absolute rubbish, because what is this for? The collections are really expensive. They are expensive to keep, they're expensive to care for. So they should be there. I mean, we don't have to kind of make democratic processes necessarily to ask everyone. Most people would very clearly say, yeah, waste of money. We don't need this, and then you would need to think about, what, but this is also keeping our histories. We can work through them. And it's most likely for many people just this kind of level of acceptance that they don't feel invited. And I feel what some really great museums have done in recent years, to not only lower the threshold in trying to kind of probably talk in different ways to their audiences, invite them specifically somehow, sometimes also speaking about issues that before were absolutely not on vogue, to
Right.
talk about. But, and that I feel there is still a lot of work to do, you know, realizing that most or often the building and the location of the museum are really not allowing people to come. So, for instance, if you're in South Kensington, I mean, why would people from East London travel because they feel like the V&A is our museum or the design museum, and that is the moment where probably these museums can develop formats, and that then it is important to kind of say, what can we do for someone in Walthamstow, or what can we do for someone also in Richmond, and probably these communities are very, very different, or in Tolworth, but we are there also for them. So, is there something we might not necessarily want to go with our collection there, but is there something, how can we connect? And that is where I feel, I mean, V&A East have done some good work in preparation of moving there to kind of work with communities to also really treat them as respectful neighbors and members of the public, to kind of say, okay, we are coming here, what do you expect us to do? We are your institution, so what is the right thing? For instance, a museum in Hamburg, the Museum für Kunst und Gewerbe there, they have their relatively new director, Tolga Bayerle. She invented a space that is called Free Space. And what she wanted exactly to kind of deal with this invitation and to kind of address and realize an invitation in the museum, she said, there needs to be a space in the museum that is free from any commercial activity. So I want people, this is the space for them. You can come, you can hang out there. There is no need to buy a ticket, but there is also no need to consume anything. You don't even need to buy a coffee or a water or anything. It's just space for you. And then there are two hosts, and they are called hosts, curators, that sometimes there is some programming, and again, you can take part, but you also don't have to. So certain communities, they come there, for instance, I don't know, knitting clubs or something, and just to occupy the space, but to really understand the museum as a civic space that is shared, that is there for you, for everyone in the community, so they can just use the space, but also, use the collection for themselves. So sometimes they might, they might be there for years. The space only exists for half a year, but for me, this is a really convincing model of being or behaving as a host, to say, you can go to the exhibitions, but this is only one thing that we do. You don't have to, because the exhibitions you have to pay for, so but the museum is still there for you. So you can come. And she said to me recently, I went to the space and there was someone sleeping in one of the corners, and it's fine. It's fine. If this is what you need, or other people, they probably came in when the museum was not in lockdown, but where still many people were working from home, and they probably didn't had ideal conditions, but they came there and had their meetings there, and so then you also realize there is negotiation. You have to kind of see, are there enough people? Am I respectful, or am I occupying the space? So it's kind of like a mini society in this one space, where sometimes you can do whatever you want because not many other people are there. And sometimes you might come there and you have to share and you don't find really a place. And if you have expected to hang out in a meeting at this point, this will not be possible. But it's this kind of also the recognition that, for most of Europe, where of course English museums are such a great example, is that the permanent displays are for free. So for them, this is already the first kind of invitation to kind of say, you can come in your free time or in your lunch break, you can look at one display and then you can go. And that, I have to say, I always enjoyed when you see this, that people are rushing in, look at one thing, rush out again, and just, got their fix or whatever they got,
Yeah, exactly.
But because you can, because you work close by and you run in and, like some people probably use churches for a quick prayer. So people just go and watch a painting, and
it almost becomes like a community center, right? Like that type of effect. Yeah. No,
so in this respect, it's important to kind of understand these are civic institutions that have a duty also to kind of change, when society is changing. So it might be, now that we are looking into decolonizing in the earnest, we might have to kind of give away a lot of collections. And that might redefine certain museums, because they will lose something that is very dear to them at this point. And that should be possible. I think what we probably, because the 20th century was kind of the consolidation for many museums as kind of having a growing history, also having a reputation with growing collections, etc., etc. Now is probably the time to understand that a museum has not a fixed, practice, and is not an institution that is not changing, but it needs to change constantly, because that is its definition. It is only there for the people. There is nothing else. There is no kind of other function, like an archive probably. There are overlaps with an archive where you can say, okay, even if people now say, I don't know, we don't have to spend so much money to kind of save all these documents, we will still kind of try to do our best to kind of save them, because we understand that history can be reread and reinterpreted at any point in time. So what we find superfluous or not as good quality nowadays, might be in 50 years' time the quality to kind of, or have a value that we couldn't even imagine at this point. So that is something where, of course, collections, documentations become really, really important. But it doesn't need to be that, you know, this question of eternity is quite tricky for museums. You know, it's not only tricky, but it's sometimes a doomed call, you know, where you think to be honest, we know exactly, I mean, conservatives even better than curators, that certain materials, they will disappear. You know, we can't keep paper forever, you know.
Yeah.
And certain ways of documenting film or that was just on a material that it will fade or it will go. And of course, then the more we show certain objects, the more we damage them. But you know, there is no other way. So in this respect, it hopefully also allows us to think more flexibly about the documentation function of a museum, so in holding kind of history, but at the same time also what can be written and what does need to be kept in a physical material form. Yeah. Anyway, I'm pretty sure I'm far away from what you...
No, not at all. I mean, what I was actually going to say, actually, to connect to that is, do you feel that like online collections or exhibitions could be an answer to that? And also, just a side question as well, is there, because I mean, from what you said earlier about where the collection, was it the last year or the year before for your students where it was online?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, like, was you what how can I say? What is it? Would you say that would be a good example of a collection being online actually having more engagement potentially than a physical exhibition or a physical collection?
It's probably not. It's a good question. It's not a question that you can answer with a straight yes or no.
Yeah.
And I have to say, what I think is definitely a huge advantage is to have collections online, so databases.
Right.
I'm of a generation that kind of experienced the introduction of online databases. And what was interesting, and the V&A was one of the museums that really, really started, I mean, not the first museum, but it was one of the first that kind of made the decision, okay, we put the collection online. And of course, there was a lot of insecurity, or there were a lot of worries from colleagues, who saw it. Oh my God, people can now see what I have catalogs and what I haven't. No one notices. I mean, if you have 1,000 objects, I mean, who would? But what they have seen, and I have to say, in the period when I was working there, or in the years I was working there, it was only beneficial because members of the public would come and say, oh, I noticed this, you have written this about this object, but, you know, quite often it was people that were involved in certain objects, you know, that either the father was the designer or they were involved in the production or something. So it was always really, really valuable kind of data that people would bring to us. And then, of course, there is a part, I have to admit, that is not visible to everyone. And so there are certain parts that the institution is holding back. And that is mainly, you know, quite often things where we are not sure about, or things where we feel they would be misunderstood by the public. So, for instance, sometimes I get leads in the research, you know, from colleagues or from members of the public, where they say, oh, you should really go and interview this person, or they have private collections, you know. And with private collections, it's always a very delicate kind of negotiation before they say, yes, you can come, you can see. And so sometimes these leads are very vague, you know, where you have to kind of probably wait for the moment when the moment is right to kind of go there, or someone introduces you to someone. So in many cases in the VNA, I know when I'm now looking at the databases, you know, oh my God, you know, someone really needs to kind of look into these boxes to develop the research further. But sometimes it's also it's really sensitive, it's time sensitive, you know, where probably people are very old, so you have to go quite quickly. Sometimes you have to also wait until someone's family, you know, where someone says, okay, it's in my will, and you can only hope and see what will happen. So there are a lot of these, you know, it's in some respects a living organism, you know, that you are still looking after. So to come back to your question, database, definitely, it is a public, for me, you know, it is something that the public owns. So the public also should see the research where the research is. And most of the time I mean, it can only be beneficial. You know, the great thing is that so many people now kind of Google the collection, and because the VNA did something right in that, very often with certain objects, the first thing you find is the VNA's database. So you get quite extensive and most of the time, I would say, quite thorough research, you know, that you can rely on. So that is, you know, probably not as Wikipedia. So it is a little bit more, at least it is more, you know, exactly who has signed off these objects. So there is a signature, there is an author. It's not very much where you think like, has someone constructed their own biography, you know?
Yeah, their own version of something.
And how much reliable is this? With exhibitions, I have to say, and some other formats, I think what lockdown allowed us is to really understand in museums and curatorial practice in general that we still have no clue, or we have developed probably 2% of what we could do digitally. So that is something, I think there is still a big field, and it's not websites, I feel. You know, it's
So what do you feel then? Sorry.
programming, you know, where, and I feel the why probably it has taken us so long to recognize this is that there has been always this absolute focus on exhibitions. And so I remember the times in the 90s when the internet came up, and all of a sudden there were the first online exhibitions realized, and everyone in the museum world got cold feet and was talking about, okay, will we become obsolete in few years' time? Didn't happen because people love physical objects. So what we have seen during COVID is, you know, that we love physical contact. We can do this, you know, but we also know there is a point where probably if we would have more discussions where we would say, okay, this time we are meeting physically, you know, or we go and visit an exhibition together, you know, because there is something that you can't replicate. And so one thing that, of course, museum people, but also designers know is there is a physicality to an object, you know, that is not reproducible. You know, there are certain things that you can do much better online. So for instance, because you are not allowed to touch anything, online you can also not, but you can of course show an object for around, you know, you don't have to kind of choose this one place. How will the visitor, you know, there is a relationship, and you can put a mirror behind or below or whatever. But and of course sometimes you can walk around it, but you cannot touch it. So probably this might be something, but I think in general people love to have this experience, to be in a space that is. So now I'm probably starting to lecture. No, but one theory that I'm using, I don't know if you read anything by the French philosopher Michel Foucault. He wrote a text where he compares utopias and heterotopias. And what he means with heterotopias are places that exist in the world that are not, that are somehow outside of the world because they represent world, but not in a one-to-one thing. So it's not in a miniature format, but as a reflection. And museums are some of these spaces. So fairgrounds, for instance, again, they play with your imagination, or cinemas, to create worlds that otherwise you wouldn't necessarily. So the fascination for us with these spaces is that they are not necessarily related to our day-to-day, life. So they allow us to be outside of these theaters as well, but where we treat these spaces in a different way. And so many people, they either, so of course nowadays you would say you would learn about history, but quite often it's also the fascination to kind of see certain old objects or enjoy them, whether this is, Baroque furniture or whether this is modernist ceramics, and that is something that kind of opens a world to us that you want to come close to. And that is where I feel the internet or the digital probably can do a lot of and can simulate a lot of things, but in the end, it's all screen. So in this respect, and that is something I guess we're all getting really tired of, that we could do all sorts of different things, but it was always, I was sitting here the whole day in, day out, and there were different programs running up. Sometimes I would speak, sometimes I wouldn't speak, sometimes it was just played to me, sometimes it was really challenging, but in the end, it was all the same thing. So I guess in this respect, we started also, as we started with teaching, to learn how can we interact with each other in this way. And of course, was fascinating, that we could come together and people are in Mexico and someone in Japan and someone here. And the only thing what you realize is that some people are really tired, some people eat breakfast, and you realize that time zones are kind of conflating and disturbing us, but the rest is fine. But so in this respect, I think there will always be something, as long as we are still human beings that like to kind of behave in a physical space, that we want to go there to experience something, and it because we are looking for an experience that is, and that sounds now a bit bonkers, but otherworldly, that is not part of this, day-to-day thing where you think like, I have to earn my money to put dinner on the table and to keep the house warm, but to really allows us to dream, even, or to see certain things where you think like, I will never in my whole life be able to earn or own it. But also certain things, I think we don't necessarily want to own it. We are also very happy to be with certain things, or as we are happy to be with certain people for some time. So in this respect, I think there is still a lot to learn, but I think both have their qualities, and probably during lockdown we realized how much there is still to do in the digital, and that there is a lot to discover. But I'm optimistic that one will not replace the other.
Right.
And
yeah.
we are quite certain now that we are so literate, that we understand that we are not just replacing this. No one is talking about giving up travel because we can meet or we can watch films about Costa Rica. We still want to go. And
of
I
course.
think that exactly that happens also in a museum, that there are certain things that sometimes come to town where you think like, otherwise I can't always travel around the world to kind of see things. And so that is, I think people are intelligent and make this differentiation, but also that we want to have these different spaces there. And as long as we can afford it, I mean, it is something I have to say a society like ours needs to be able to afford. Museums can't be afforded or rarely be afforded in kind of places where there are wars or there are, that where people are starving. You wouldn't keep a collection going. So that is something you have to be able to afford and to see as a value for your society, as we are writing books or affording research. It's the same.
I'm really when you said about how we've only made like a slither of progress, or not even that much progress into the digital. I'm glad you, well, not I'm glad, it kind of confirms what I thought, because when I've been looking this up, and even even exhibitions or kind of small galleries that I have seen online, I haven't, it's just not the same whatsoever.
Oh, no.
It just isn't, no. And it's just, I was wondering actually as well, like, is there one or two examples that you might have seen from an online exhibition or gallery that you would maybe recommend to me, or that you've seen? Because I just still haven't really found one that I can connect to in the same way as seeing like a an exhibition physically.
I would probably say it can be combinations of the two, or
Right.
formats. I don't know if do you know the Instagram feed Design Emergency by Paula Antonelli and Alice Roaston?
Okay, no, I might understand now. Okay.
So Paula Antonelli is the design curator in MoMA,
Okay.
and Alice Roaston is a journalist here in London, and they together developed this Instagram feed about design in emergency. And of course, because of COVID. But what was interesting in this, and it came through a project that Paula was doing beforehand, and that is probably one of, I mean, it was very much discussed with its faults, but it was one of the best online curatorial formats that I have seen. That was an exhibition at MoMA, or it started as a website on design and violence a few years back. And it mainly came through that Paula Antonelli and Jana Hunt, an academic at the design school Parsons in New York, they wanted to create, or they proposed this project to MoMA, and MoMA said, no, this is too tricky, we can't really do that. And then they said, but it's really urgent that we look into this relationship, and they were allowed to do this online, of course, because it was hoped that it will only attract a few people. It will not be difficult for patrons in America. People who are involved probably would feel uncomfortable if that would be on public display, and there would be kind of press about this, etc. I mean, we could say a lot about this, but what this did was that Paula and Jana, they recognized, that certain, it was the relationship between design and violence. And of course, you could have negotiated this in an exhibition, but in the exhibition, it's much, much more difficult. I mean, in most instances, and we have tried to kind of break this open as curators, but we are still kind of developing methods for it, that visitors become active, that they are not passive. However, it's really difficult to engage in a discussion. The exhibition format is not lending itself. We have tried with post-it notes, all rubbish in my view. This needs to happen elsewhere, but not in the exhibition, because I'm not, as a curator, I'm not in my exhibition for 2 months. So if there are post-it notes, shall I respond to them? I mean, how do we engage in conversation? So what they did in this on this website, which I thing still exists. It was more organized like a blog, so that they chose 5 subjects. So it was curated like an exhibition, but then with each subject they had certain design projects, and they introduced there. And then they were already thinking about who are the people who are introducing this, and they didn't work by themselves. They could have written everything themselves, but they invited other people in as a way of creating a conversation. So, and then people, of course, as you have on a blog, they were responding to it, they were sending things, they were questioning. So, and sometimes it was really uncomfortable kind of discussions that were happening there, because some people took the opportunity to kind of, really play down the dangers of violence and the objects that are part of this. And then other people, they were talking too much about this, not, and really critiquing the curators, why are you showing the Kalashnikov, and celebrating this? And they were like, no, but not everything that we as, that is displayed is a celebration. It's really difficult, but because there is a long, long history of that museums are just showing the best objects, especially in design and art museums. There is not, we haven't developed, if you go to the Imperial War Museum, you are kind of, you expect that you will see objects that might really unsettle you, that are not comfortable, that the stories that they have to tell, they are not comfortable, but that is expected. With design or art, it's most of the time you show the best things, and that is a celebration of where we are. So only in the last kind of few decades, we have started to kind of really be more and more conceptual, where there is no chronological necessarily history kind of that we are interested in presenting, but to present these relationships, or to present a certain situation, or to present ideas that seem to kind of bother or occupy a lot of people, or a lot of designers in our case, very often. And then also, and sometimes it can be how practice is changing, in recent years, to really break it open and say designers are not just there to produce commercial objects or support commercial interests. Design, if we recognize that the whole world is designed, then there are systems, structures, processes that are all designed and part of design processes that we need to recognize, but also can change. So that is kind of responsibility, but at the same time also encouragement to action. So in this respect, coming back to design and violence, for me, that was one of the project. In the end, they got an opportunity to also do an exhibition, which unfortunately I haven't seen. However, from the images, I would say, yeah, I would question whether this format was necessary. It's nice, you can see this in an exhibition, you go around, but then you are with your critique, with your questions on your own. And or a lot has to happen and be supported by the curatorial text or by the curatorial guidance through the exhibition, that, it depends on the curation, whether you want to really keep it open and not, in a kind of, nothing is neutral, but in a way where you really want to give the biggest possibility of interpretation to the audience, to then say, you can create your opinion through this, but it's up to you. It's not up to us to tell you, this is really terrible, and so we can't talk about this or whatever. So in this respect, I have to say, I have seen good, for me, this was a great attempt to kind of really redefine and something that they probably would have thought or started as an exhibition to really understand, what is in this case, the internet allowing us to do. So, for instance, what they do with Instagram, with this Design and Emergency one, they are also doing these films interviews where they interview one person and introduce either a specific project or their work in general. And that I find, again, interesting because it has more responsiveness, to things. But also, I mean, if you see now this, they are running this for more than 1.5 years, I think. So there is a record of this, you can still kind of listen to most of these interviews. And what you see is that they haven't always kind of interviewed designers in the strictest sense. So sometimes it was a surgeon in a hospital because they developed and redesigned a machine, during COVID, just out of necessity. And so that was something that they wanted to also break open to address this expansion of design, that it's not only professional designers design. So that, but at the same time also introduce things where if they would have waited to make an exhibition about this, that wouldn't have been anything in the moment that was right. And in some respects, the question with exhibitions is also that, and that is something that I'm also really interested in kind of changing first and foremost in the institution, is that very often exhibitions are presented as the end result of a project, whether this is research or whatever. However, if we really critically look at exhibitions and what they can do is, because they are the public kind of or the public communication of research that has been done behind closed doors to this point, there is so much that then comes back, whether these are contacts, whether this is research that people say, oh, did you not know my project, whether this is practice in terms of design or art. So very often this kind of starts another kind of part of this research. And that is something we also have to understand, that how do we use exhibitions as a public dissemination of research for some time that then can go back behind closed doors, into the laboratory, and where you can then think about, for instance, it might show you that only that this project is really valuable for certain people, but for instance, as we said before, they wouldn't come. So you have to bring a different offer to them. Or that, sometimes you can only show certain objects for 2 months. So you can't travel the exhibition around the world because the objects can't be exposed to light, or for instance, you take them out of a context where they are really in use, which is very often in contemporary design the case, where you think like, this is so new, or this is part of an industrial process, we can't replicate it for the exhibition. So we can borrow this for a short period of time, but then it needs to go back. So these are issues, where you think like, okay, the exhibition can be a stimulator for other things to happen. So it shouldn't necessarily be seen as the end point. So as with design and violence, that allowed them then to be responsive at a time where people were wondering, how does design practice, respond to a situation like COVID? And through their podcast, or podcasts were another thing that kind of came up quite successfully. But I feel, the V&A had started 5, 6, 7 years ago with this new collections process, what they call rapid response collecting, and that became that was discussed all over the world as a new concept of contemporary collecting. In the end, what it showed is that in an institution like the V&A, you can't really rapidly collect. There are certain procedures, there is an institution, you can't kind of get something today, have it displayed tomorrow, have it publicly discussed. Here we have seen, on an Instagram feed or in a podcast, you can do that,
Mhm.
and that is where probably then the object was not necessarily, physically so important, where it was the discussion and an understanding, how is design practice kind of supporting or hindering, a critical situation like the pandemic. So in this
Nice.
respect, that is where an understanding and a really, really careful selection of the format of curatorial practice is so important, because
Mm.
it can be completely, a missed opportunity, because you develop an exhibition, and if the exhibition would be shown now, everyone was fed up this summer with COVID and wanted to turn back to normality. So Amy Winehouse is most likely really the thing that everyone wants to go to, because it shows a kind of normality with something where no one wants to hear about how, you know, about rainbow flags or whatever.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay. That's given me a lot to think about. Yeah. No, I'm not gonna lie. I think my questions that I had, I think we've covered all of them, to be honest, Jana. This
Okay.
is this is this has been amazing.
Oh, nice.
Thank
Good.
you. No,
Good.
honestly, this has been
Happy.
really really good. Like yeah. Trying to think of anything else. Sorry, I'm just quickly having a look at anything else I jotted down. Um,
I mean, also, whenever, should there be any, did you record? Yes, you did record it. So should there be any questions, just come back.
Yeah, oh, brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah,
It's fine.
I think that's it for that. Yeah, that's what I've got at the moment. But yeah, again,
How long is your dissertation?
my dissertation is 7 to 8,000 words. So
Okay.
yeah,
It's
no, I've got a bit of. I mean, it's not due in until the 20th of January, but I'm getting everything in now. I've also what I mentioned earlier in our talk is because of especially getting into more kind of to have gone to interactive and immersive like multi-sensory kind of experiences. I've I've tried to recreate them myself on a couple of projects. So
ah,
one of them is where it was basically to tell the story of my grandfather he was a footballer in his when he was younger, and it was basically creating like a mini installation where you would tick at different targets at a goal, and then what is being projected onto that goal would change when the audience would hit the target.
oh, right.
Um,
Oh, good.
so that's also what I was kind of interested as well to get into for my dissertation as well. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because it has, and obviously I took a year out during COVID, so it really has made me, yeah, like I said at the beginning, like reevaluate, and that's probably why I've gotten into looking into curation is just, yeah, as you say, what is the right format
Yeah.
to show something. Yeah, which is really interesting as well when you're saying about online collections and stuff like that, where it's actually the talks about something being created or the interview with an artist makes more sense on a online format as opposed to trying to recreate work on an online format, which actually is more successful if you view it physically,
Yeah.
which for some reason I'd never I'd never really thought of before. Yeah. 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 No, thank you so much.
Oh,
Just
great.
having a yeah. I
Uh,
mean, I suppose do you have any questions or I don't know anything you wanted to add or?
no, I mean, it's a topic, as you can see, I can talk about endlessly. So
That's
it's
brilliant.
good.
No, honestly, yeah,
But also,
yeah.
really, should you have any questions at some point where you think like, I wish I would have asked this question, just come back.
Okay, thank you so
But
much.
good luck
Yeah,
with the writing.
thank you. But yeah, yeah, if that's all right, I probably will have maybe. I think what I plan to do is, like, after our talk is actually I'm probably going to listen to it straight away and just kind of jot down certain things, and then if it's possible, just to
That makes sense. Yeah.
give you an email with a few questions. But again, thank you so much.
Okay. No, it was a pleasure. Pleasure
Cheers.
to speak. Hey, and good luck with COVID. I hope it is a short period.
I think, I mean, I don't, I mean, I'm self-isolating for another week, so fingers crossed. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, good luck.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, Kieran.
Bye-bye.